Hallucinogens are generally broken up into three groups: psychedelics, dissociatives, and deliriants. Psychedelics have long been the most popular, while dissociatives are used to a lesser extent, and deliriants are rarely taken. The psychedelic group includes drugs like LSD, psilocin, and DMT. Dissociatives include ketamine, PCP, and dextromethorphan, and among the deliriants are atropine, scopolamine, and diphenhydramine. Each of these classes has a clear set of effects and mechanism of action in the brain, though there are some drugs that blur the lines, such as ibogaine, salvinorin A, and DMT. Before we begin, it's worth noting psychedelic can be used to describe individual experiences coming from substances not usually included in the psychedelic class. For the purpose of this video, I am not including drugs like MDMA and cannabis in the psychedelic group, even though they can provide psychedelic-like experiences. And I'm focusing on the psychological effects rather than the physical safety of these drugs, which will be discussed elsewhere on the Drug Classroom. I will briefly discuss the pharmacological differences between these classes and then jump into the effects. Psychedelics function by binding to serotonin receptors and activating them. This makes them 5-HT receptor agonists. There are a number of 5-HT receptors which may be affected by psychedelics, but the most important appears to be the 5-HT2A receptor. All of the psychedelics we usually think about are affecting this receptor. Upon agonizing those serotonin receptors, different psychedelics may trigger different responses from the neurons. Dissociatives function by blocking, also known as antagonizing, NMDA receptors. This significantly reduces the activity that would normally occur through these receptors, which can have a range of effects on pain, memory, perception, and general cognitive function. Deliriants are also antagonists, but they function at different receptors. They specifically affect acetylcholine receptors, in particular the muscarinic acetylcholine receptor. With this action, they can be referred to as anticholinergics and antimuscarinics. By binding to those areas, deliriants prevent acetylcholine from carrying out its normal actions. There are also some drugs that break away from this classification. For example, salvinorin A, a primary drug in Salvia divinorum, and ibogaine are agonists at the kappa opioid receptor. Those drugs provide psychedelic and dissociative effects, yet they are functioning differently from the usual psychedelic or dissociative. Getting into the effects, psychedelics, dissociatives, and deliriants produce notably different experiences, and I will give a brief overview of them to show how they differ. Psychedelics tend to provide a sort of collaborative experience between you and your environment. They change, sometimes radically, your visual and auditory senses. At times, they may cross these senses, resulting in synesthesia, where the input of one sense produces a response in another. The visual changes, for example, can leave your environment warped, such that surfaces change shape, colors are intensified, tracers are created by any bit of motion, and everything around you is breathing or melting. By no means does that encompass the full range of visual effects, of course. The point here is that you can still move and often operate normally in the world at common doses, but the world and your psychological response to it is greatly altered. On top of changing your perception, psychedelics create far stronger emotional responses to everything you see, hear, or think. Because of all these changes and your psychological response to them, psychedelics may be hard to handle, but they can also be very insightful and helpful for creative endeavors. Dissociatives are distinct from psychedelics. Instead of primarily altering your perception, they disconnect you from your environment and may even replace your reality with something new. Both depersonalization, a disconnection from your identity, and derealization, the feeling that the world or parts of it aren't real, can occur. Depending on the dose, dissociatives can disconnect you from your environment, your body, and from your identity. There are not as many complex external visual effects, but they can make your vision blurry, alter your depth perception, and begin to break apart your visual field, resulting in splicing and disconnections throughout your vision. Distinguishing between your body and environment can become difficult, making it feel as though the boundaries of your body have expanded. As the experience progresses, A sort of out-of-body experience can take hold, replacing your internal and external surroundings with a new reality. You may experience complex visual hallucinations, new environments, entities, and even seemingly independent worlds and plot lines. This experience can be very introspective, but you may also feel disconnected from what's going on and even from your thoughts. Negative experiences are possible, yet your emotional involvement with them often is not as great as it would be with psychedelics. They are generally considered easier to handle overall, though the experiences can still be psychologically difficult. Dissociatives are much more likely to produce a full separation between your point of consciousness and your identity. This can also happen on psychedelics, but it is not nearly as common. When this separation occurs, you are left witnessing the dissociative's perceptual effects while no longer being attached to your normal self. Coming out of the experience, memory impairment is more common, and dissociative experiences are frequently described as dreamlike. Before moving on, it should be noted there are similarities between full dissociative states and the peak experiences provided by drugs like DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, and salvia divinorum. All of those may be considered psychedelics, but their peak effects have many dissociative qualities, with users being detached from the environment, their bodies, and even themselves. Deliriants are, in my opinion, the most interesting group of hallucinogens. They are primarily known for their ability to create experiences that include true hallucinations, which the user does not realize are drug-induced. It is possible to have a full conversation with an entirely non-existent person, smoke a cigarette that does not exist, and see spiders or insects which have no basis in reality. At any given time, the reality you are seeing could include things that don't really exist, or it may be lacking things that really are there, such as cars or doors. This is very rare on psychedelics, and while somewhat more common on dissociatives, it is still not a key part of the experience like it is with deliriants. The ongoing visual effects are either minimal or impairing, such as blurred vision, altered depth perception, and an inability to focus. Feeling separate from other people is frequently reported. For example, you may have trouble speaking and therefore feel separate. Or you may think you are speaking perfectly fine when you actually aren't, which also results in feeling separate. The majority of experiences are partially or entirely negative, which is not the case with psychedelics or dissociatives. Your response to everything that's taking place can also be entirely abnormal, such as being totally unfazed by someone disappearing into thin air. Essentially, you may end up in your own reality that's overlaying the real world. During this time, you could be unaware or partially unaware that you've taken a drug. Severe memory impairment and cognitive dysfunction is common, such that recognizing a family member or carrying out simple tasks could be impossible. Your ability to even be conscious of what you are doing is also impaired, allowing you to walk around, talk to people, or engage in dangerous behaviors without really being present or having a memory of what you've done. This combination of effects makes deliriants almost entirely negative, though some neutral or even insightful experiences have taken place. It is worth noting that deliriant experiences are effectively periods of psychosis which can sometimes become violent and dangerous. Users may become combative when someone, like a doctor, friend, or police officer, is trying to help them. Being this disconnected from reality and your actions means taking a deliriant without a sitter cannot reasonably be viewed as safe, and even the existence of a sitter does not eliminate many of the potential issues. If you have any questions about psychedelics, dissociatives, or deliriants, feel free to leave them in the comments section. In order for the drug classroom to provide more education, support is necessary, and the best way to support is through Patreon at patreon.com/thedrugclassroom. You can also contribute through YouTube, PayPal, or Bitcoin. You can connect with me on Twitter at Seth A. Fitzgerald and via email at seth@thedrugclassroom.com.